Watkins is currently going viral for saying some things about Caitlin Clark.
It all started with a single interview, but it ended up exposing a divide that was hiding in plain sight. Juju Watkins, the USC superstar known for her game, was suddenly going viral for her words. And with a few carefully measured sentences, she lit a fire across the entire basketball world, sending social media into an absolute frenzy. Fans, analysts, and players instantly took sides, creating a war of narratives that stretched far beyond the hardwood. Was this a moment of pure jealousy from a sideline star? Or was it the brave, unfiltered truth that many athletes have been too afraid to say out loud? The controversy seemed simple on the surface, but the real story, the one buried beneath the trending hashtags and edited clips, was far more shocking.
Juju Watkins, man, and I had the honor of seeing her play in person. I had the honor of meeting her mother, and I'm telling you right now, she's next up, bro. There's no doubt in my mind that Juju Watkins is going to come into the W, standing on all business, breaking all records. That's how I feel.
This wasn't just about two players. This was about the soul of the sport in the middle of a revolution. Stay with us, because the truth behind this story is more complex than anyone realized, and it changes everything we thought we knew about fame and fairness in the modern game. Before the injury, before the headlines, and long before the controversy, Juju Watkins wasn't just a college athlete. She was an icon in the making. From the moment she stepped onto court for USC, she carried an electric energy that was impossible to ignore. Her scoring was explosive, her charisma was magnetic, and she played with maturity that seemed well beyond her years. Fans and scouts alike didn't just see a talented player. They saw the future of women's basketball. They called her next up, the one who had all the tools to not only dominate the game, but to transcend it. Her brand was building at a dizzying pace, backed by powerhouse deals with Nike and represented by Rich Paul's legendary Clutch Sports agency. She was on a rocket ship trajectory, poised to become the face of the sport. But in sports, destiny can be derailed in a single, heartbreaking moment. That moment came late in the 2024 season, a devastating ACL tear that stopped her climb to the top in its tracks.
Unfortunate news, Juju Watkins possibly will miss the entire 2025 to 26 basketball season. And this unfortunate situation, man, we ultimately know what happened to her last year. She tore her ACL, playing in a matchup to damn near go to the national champion.
The player who was supposed to own the next chapter of college basketball was suddenly forced to watch it all from the sidelines, her future shrouded in uncertainty and the long, difficult road of rehabilitation. While Juju was fighting her way back to health in silence, a different kind of storm was taking over the basketball world. They called it the Caitlin Clark effect. It was more than just a catchy phrase. It was a cultural tsunami. Caitlin Clark didn't just break records. She shattered the very ceiling of what people thought was possible for women's basketball. We're talking about a player who didn't just score points. She redefined offensive aggression, pulling up from the logo with fearlessness that made every single game must-see TV. She brought in millions of new viewers who had never followed the women's game before. Arenas that were once half full were now selling out in minutes, with fans lining up for hours just to watch her warm up. Historic TV deals were signed, and suddenly, women's basketball highlights were dominating SportsCenter's top 10 plays. Night after night, her deep three-pointers became viral sensations overnight, shared across every social media platform, turning casual sports fans into dedicated followers.
See, probably Caitlin, handles, Chelsea, Strange, Brittany Griner, range, Caitlin.
Her arrival in the WNBA wasn't just a draft. It was treated like a royal coronation. The media coverage was relentless and overwhelmingly positive, framing her as the savior of the sport. She was, without a doubt, the golden child, a marketing dream with a relatable Midwestern persona and a jaw-dropping skill set that translated perfectly for television. Major brands lined up to partner with her, and her jersey instantly became the best-selling in the league. This wasn't just success, it was a phenomenon. But this unprecedented laser-focused attention on a single superstar created an invisible undercurrent of tension that began to ripple through the entire ecosystem of women's basketball.
Her for landing big-time shoe deals like Nike, that is not stopping her from her agent Clutch Sports, who I still believe Caitlin Clark should have went to. Rich Paul keeping her name alive, and as of right now, to me, Juju Watkins is still going to be the biggest star in college basketball without actually picking up.
While Caitlin's success was unequivocally earned through incredible skill, relentless hard work, and a clutch gene that seemed almost supernatural, many began to quietly question the system that seemed so eager to crown one, and only one, main character. The narrative often felt singular, as if the entire sport's viability rested on her shoulders alone. Whispers started to circulate in locker rooms, on podcasts, and among seasoned analysts about favoritism, about how certain players get covered differently by the press, celebrated differently by the league's own marketing arms, and even protected differently by referees on the court. Fans and players alike noticed patterns. They saw physical plays against Clark that would immediately result in a whistle, while similar, or even more aggressive, contact against other star players would go uncalled. They saw post-game press conferences and media availabilities where the questions for Clark were about her historic greatness, while her teammates or opponents were asked about their role in her story. This growing sentiment wasn't necessarily about blaming Caitlin herself. She was simply playing the game she loved at the highest level, but about challenging a structure, a media landscape, and a cultural bias that appeared to anoint one star above a roster of other equally talented, equally hardworking, and equally deserving talents. Players like Aya Wilson, a former MVP and champion, Breanna Stewart, a multi-time winner, and even rising stars like Juju herself seemed to exist in a different tier of media consciousness. The stage was set for an explosion, a necessary conversation about equity and recognition that was bubbling just beneath the surface. All it needed was a single spark to bring it all into the light. That spark came during what should have been a standard, positive interview with Sports Illustrated. Juju Watkins, calm and poised amidst her challenging rehab, was discussing her recovery journey and her evolving views on the game. She carried herself with a maturity that belied her age, reflecting thoughtfully on her time away from the court. When the conversation turned to the players she currently admired in the game, her answer was respectful, professional, and complimentary. She didn't hesitate to shout out Aya Wilson for her sheer dominance and leadership, Chelsea Gray for her unparalleled strength and court vision, and yes, she explicitly praised Caitlin Clark for her clutch shooting and incredible defense-breaking handles. It was a kind of gracious, well-rounded answer you'd expect from a professional athlete who understands the landscape of her sport. But then, the interviewer likely prompted a deeper reflection on the state of the game, and Juju, perhaps feeling the safety of a longer-form conversation, ventured into nuanced and dangerously honest territory. She casually mentioned that in the world of basketball, it's just a reality that some players get called differently by the officials, covered differently by the media, and celebrated differently by the public and the powers that be. It was a broad, observational comment about the industry's inherent imbalances, one that any seasoned player, coach, or insider would immediately nod their head to, because they see it and live it every day. It was a statement about systemic bias, not personal animosity. However, in the hyperreactive, attention-driven world of social media, nuance is the first and most costly casualty. The internet doesn't traffic in context. It thrives on conflict. Almost instantly, clips were ripped from the full, hour-long conversation. They were meticulously edited down to a provocative 15-second soundbite, stripped of all the praise and preceding context. The framing was deliberate and explosive. Headlines from clickbait blogs and reactionary content channels screamed that Juju Watkins was throwing shade, that she was bitter from the sidelines, that she was openly and personally attacking Caitlin Clark. The video thumbnails featured pictures of both women with angry red arrows and words like exposed and beef. The internet didn't just accidentally miss the context. It actively, knowingly erased it. The algorithm rewarded engagement, and nothing drives engagement like a good, messy feud. A thoughtful comment from a young athlete trying to articulate the complex realities of her profession was systematically twisted into a declaration of war. The full unedited interview, which showed a measured and insightful Juju, was buried under an avalanche of simplified, dramatized, and weaponized clips designed to pit two black women against each other for public entertainment. The real conversation was lost before it even had a chance to begin. What happened next was a masterclass in modern digital chaos, a case study in how online mobs can create a reality entirely divorced from fact. The online world fractured almost instantly into two distinct, angry camps, digging their trenches in the toxic soil of social media. Hashtags like hashtag Team Juju and hashtag Team Caitlin started trending worldwide, becoming battlegrounds for thousands of fans, trolls, and bots. On one side, supporters fiercely defended Juju, calling her courageous for speaking a hard, uncomfortable truth about the double standards and implicit biases that have long plagued women's sports. They saw her as a warrior, a new generation leader willing to challenge the status quo and call out the media for its lopsided coverage. They pointed to the undeniable differences in how players of different styles and backgrounds are portrayed and rewarded. On the other side, Critics launched a relentless assault, accusing Juju of sour grapes jealousy and playing the victim instead of focusing on her recovery. They argued that Caitlin's blinding spotlight was earned solely through sheer, undeniable greatness, and that Juju's comments were nothing more than a cheap shot, a desperate grab for attention while she was out of game. The platforms became a flood zone of inflammatory content. TikToks and YouTube Shorts, optimized for maximum outrage, flooded feeds, pairing Juju's out-of-context audio with slow-motion clips of Caitlyn hitting deep, demoralizing threes. These videos were often accompanied by on-screen text like "jealousy is a disease" or "stay on the bench," set to dramatic music. The conversation, which Juju had tried to elevate to a systemic level, was instantly reduced to a simplified, dramatic, and personal feud. It was no longer about the why or the how of coverage and officiating. It was now a childish argument over who was better, who was right, and who was morally superior. Through it all, Juju did something fascinating and strategically brilliant. She maintained total public silence. She didn't post a clarification on her Instagram story. She didn't quote tweet her critics. She didn't clap back. Her silence became a vast, echoing void that the internet frantically filled with its own projections, assumptions, and fantasies. Some saw her silence as a sign of quiet, unshakable confidence, a queen who doesn't need to address the peasants. Others interpreted it as an admission of guilt, proof that she knew she had stepped out of line and had nothing smart to say in her defense. Her strategic decision to stay out of the digital fray, likely on the advice of her team at Clutch Sports, only added more mysterious fuel to the fire, proving that in the digital age, sometimes the most powerful and enigmatic statement is the one you deliberately choose not to make. So, what was Juju Watkins actually trying to say before her message was twisted, weaponized, and fed into the insatiable content machine? If you strip away the noise, log out of Twitter, and actually listen to her full, unedited interview with patience and intent, her point becomes crystal clear, and it was never personal. It was profoundly systemic. Her frustration wasn't with Caitlin Clark the person, but with the invisible, unaccountable machinery that governs modern sports stardom. She was pointing a finger at the unspoken rule book, the hidden curriculum of basketball that grants some players a longer leash with referees, a more forgiving and celebratory narrative from the media, and a more protected image overall. This is a feeling deeply understood and shared by a vast number of athletes, particularly women of color, who have long expressed that they feel they have to be twice as good, work twice as hard, and act twice as perfectly to receive even half the recognition and leeway. It's about the subtle and not-so-subtle fouls that never get called when they're on the receiving end of a hard drive to the basket. It's about how their physical aggressive play is often labeled reckless or dirty, while the same style from others is celebrated as gritty and competitive. It's about the headlines that focus on their fashion, or their demeanor instead of their basketball IQ, or their historic statistical achievements. Juju wasn't asking for Caitlin's well-deserved spotlight to be dimmed. That would be petty and counterproductive. She was asking for the light to be shared more broadly, to be adjusted, to illuminate the other incredible, diverse talents who are helping to grow the league. Her comments were a direct challenge to the powers that be, the league offices, the television networks, the corporate sponsors, and the refereeing associations to take a long, hard look in the mirror and examine their own unconscious biases. She was calling for a creation of a more level, equitable playing field where greatness in all its forms, the dominant post play of an Io Wilson, the surgical precision of a Chelsea Gray, the explosive scoring of a Juju Watkins, can be equally seen, celebrated, and compensated. This was never a battle between two players. It was a plea for a fairer, more inclusive, and ultimately more interesting game for everyone. It was about ensuring that the historic growth of women's basketball lifts all boats, not just one singular, albeit spectacular, yacht. While the digital world was burning, Juju Watkins was in the lab. The noise of social media feuds and trending hashtags couldn't penetrate the four walls of the gym where her real battle was taking place. She took all that frustration from being misunderstood, all that misdirected anger from thousands of online commentators, and all that raw, competitive fire that had been building since her injury, and she channeled it into the one thing that truly, undeniably mattered: her comeback. The grueling, often monotonous, rehab for her ACL tear became her sanctuary, a sacred space where actions were the only language that mattered. This wasn't just about healing, it was about metamorphosis. Imagine the scene, far from the flashbulbs and headlines. The early morning hours when most of the world was still asleep. The relentless routine of physical therapy. The slow, painful flexion of a knee that once moved with explosive grace. The careful strengthening of muscles that had to learn to trust a surgically repaired joint. This is where Juju was while people were arguing about a sentence fragment from an interview. She was silently, methodically, rebuilding her body from the ground up. But it was more than just physical reconstruction. She was rebuilding her shot, refining her ball handling, and most importantly, forging a new mindset. Those closest to her, her trainers, her family, her inner circle, all say the same thing. The controversy didn't break her. It forged her. It added a layer of steel to her resolve that wasn't there before. She was no longer just training to return to the player she was. She was training to become a player no one had ever seen before. The goal was no longer just to get back on the court. It was to dominate it, to silence every critic not with words, but with a performance so breathtaking it would rewrite her entire story. She meticulously avoided any further public discussion of the incident. There were no cryptic Instagram posts, no subtweets, no interviews to set the record straight. She understood that engaging in the online war would only give it more oxygen and pull her into a battle fought on terms she couldn't control. Instead, she made a conscious, strategic decision to let her work ethic do the talking. Her silence became a statement of its own. My energy is too valuable to waste on this. This discipline is rare, especially for someone of her generation, born into the age of instant reaction. It demonstrated a level of maturity and focus that many veteran athletes strive for their entire careers. And then, slowly, strategically, the veil began to lift. Her team, understanding the power of visual proof, began to release carefully curated clips from her training sessions. They weren't grand productions. They were raw, gritty, and incredibly effective. A slow-motion video of her elevating for a jumper, the form perfect, the landing strong and confident. A clip of her executing a series of sharp, explosive crossovers, the ball on a string, her eyes locked on an imaginary defender. Another of her sinking countless three-pointers, the swish of the net the only sound. These weren't just practice videos. They were declarations. Each clip was a piece of evidence presented to court public opinion, systematically dismantling the narrative of the jealous, sideline star and replacing it with the image of the resilient queen. The public's reaction was swift and telling. The same fans who had passionately accused her of jealousy just weeks before now flooding these videos with fire emojis and comments like, "She's back," and "The queen is coming." The conversation shifted from "what did she say" to "when will we see her play?" This phenomenon proves a fundamental truth in sports. And in life, performance is the ultimate truth teller. You can debate intentions, you can analyze words, but you cannot argue with undeniable, tangible progress. The court is the great equalizer, and Juju knew that her domain was a hardwood, not the Twitter timeline. Her training regimen became the stuff of legend within basketball circles. It wasn't just about getting her legs strong again. It was about building a body that was more resilient, more powerful, and more agile than the one that was injured. She worked with biomechanists to overhaul her movement patterns, ensuring her style of play would be sustainable and less prone to future injury. She spent hours in the film room, not just watching her own past games, but studying the greats, breaking down the nuances of players like Kobe Bryant and Diana Taurasi, searching for any mental or strategic edge she can incorporate. She focused on her nutrition, her sleep, her recovery. Every single aspect of her life was fine-tuned to serve one purpose, her return to greatness. This process was as much a psychological journey as a physical one. An ACL tear is not just a physical injury. It's a trauma that attacks an athlete's confidence. The fear of re-injury, the hesitation on a cut, the mental block when landing. These are hurdles every athlete in this situation faces. Juju had to conquer that internal voice of doubt every single day. Her trainers incorporated confidence drills into her sessions, exercises designed to push her to the edge of her physical comfort zone in a controlled environment, forcing her to trust her body again. Each successful dunk, each hard drive to the basket without flinching, was a victory over that fear. Furthermore, her time on the sidelines granted her a unique perspective she never had as a player. She was forced to become a student of the game from a coach's viewpoint. She learned to see the floor differently, to understand defensive schemes and offensive sets from a macro level. This bird's eye view, this force education, was an unexpected gift. When she returned, she wouldn't just be a more physically robust player. She would be a smarter, more cerebral one. She would be able to anticipate plays before they happened, understand her opponent's tendencies on a deeper level, and lead her teammates with newfound wisdom. The anticipation for her return began to build into a palpable energy across the sports world. It was no longer just about USC basketball. It was about witnessing the culmination of an epic personal journey. Her comeback game was being hyped as one of the most anticipated moments of the upcoming season, an event that would transcend the sport itself. It became a story about resilience, about handling adversity with grace, and about the power of letting your work speak for you. Juju Watkins understood, with a clarity that few possess, that the best response to the noise wasn't a tweet, a statement, or a clapback. It was a comeback story so powerful, so flawlessly executed, and so dominant that it would echo through the arenas and silence all the critics, not just for a news cycle, but for good. She wasn't just coming back to play basketball. She was coming back to make a statement that would define her legacy. In the end, the firestorm that started with a few sentences in an interview did something nobody could have predicted. It did more than just generate headlines or trend on social media. It administered a powerful shock to the system of women's basketball, forcing a sudden and necessary growth spurt for the entire sport. Think of a forest that has gone too long without a fire. The underbrush of old habits and unchallenged narratives had grown thick. The Juju Watkins-Caitlin Clark rivalry was a lightning strike, a dramatic, dangerous, and destructive-seeming event. But from that scorched earth, new, healthier growth was given the space and sunlight to emerge. That manufactured rivalry was always a myth, a convenient, easily digestible story sold for clicks and cheap engagement. It was a fairy tale of good versus evil, of jealousy versus grace, because that's a simple story our brains can easily process. But the authentic, messy, and profoundly important conversation it sparked was very, very real. It was a collective awakening. It violently pushed complex, simmering issues of equity, representation, and deeply ingrained media bias in the quiet shadows of private group chats and post-game size into the unforgiving mainstream spotlight. For the first time, a critical mass of fans was not just watching the games. They were critically watching the coverage around the games. They were analyzing the camera angles, the commentators' word choices, the allocation of primetime slots, and the patterns of officiating. This incident made coaches, league executives, and multi-million-dollar corporate sponsors acutely aware of a new reality. Their audience was no longer passive. They were a watchdog, they were digitally savvy, and they were demanding a fairer, more inclusive, and intellectually honest narrative. They were no longer satisfied with single protagonists. They demanded an ensemble cast where every character's journey was valued. In this new landscape, Juju Watkins, perhaps even to her own surprise, became an indelible symbol of the modern athlete, a generation that refuses to be silenced, that is unafraid to speak hard, uncomfortable truths, even when they know they will be caricatured, misunderstood, and used as a punching bag by the digital mob. She demonstrated that an athlete's power isn't confined to their physical performance on the court. It extends to their intellectual and moral courage to shape the culture that surrounds them. Her silence after the fact was not surrender. It was a strategic, powerful choice to let her eventual actions in the gym and on the court become the final, definitive word. Caitlin Clark, navigating her own unique set of challenges, firmly remained a symbol of astronomical, record-shattering growth and undeniable marketability. Her journey is the proof of concept, the irrefutable evidence that women's basketball is a premium, must-see global product capable of breaking viewership records and captivating a mainstream audience that had long ignored it. Her power to draw eyes and dollars to the sport is an invaluable tide that, in an ideal world, should lift every ship in a harbor. And this brings us to the most profound understanding. The central thesis that this entire saga reveals: Juju Watkins and Caitlin Clark are not rivals. To frame them as such is to completely miss the point of this cultural moment. They are two essential, complementary, and symbiotic forces actively shaping the very foundation of the sport's future. They are not opposing armies on a battlefield. They are the two powerful wings on the same bird, both required for it to soar to new heights. Caitlin Clark represents the immense, unlocked, explosive potential of the sport, the sheer what is possible. Juju Watkins represents the necessary accountability and the passionate demand for equity required to ensure that this newfound potential is shared, distributed, and accessible to all. One is the engine of growth. The other is a compass and the moral GPS, ensuring that growth is sustainable, ethical, and inclusive. You cannot have a lasting, healthy, and truly great sporting culture with one and not the other. An engine without a compass is destined to crash. A compass without an engine goes nowhere. Their intertwined stories now stand as a monument to a new reality. Women's basketball has officially graduated from a niche interest for purists into a complex, vibrant, and powerful cultural ecosystem. It is a space where a player's hairstyle can ignite a national conversation about identity and double standards. It is a league where a rookie's entrance is dissected with the same intensity as a 15-year veteran's legacy, and where every single game is a statement about more than just a final score. This ecosystem is now rich enough, and the stakes are high enough to support these multi-layered narratives about competition, business, social justice, and personal identity, all happening simultaneously. The true legacy of this entire situation will be written in the years to come, but we are already witnessing its first fruits. Look closely at how broadcasters now consciously make an effort to highlight a wider array of players during their national telecasts. Notice how major sponsors are now actively seeking out a more diverse portfolio of athletes for their campaigns, finally understanding that there are multiple, powerful pathways to connect with a fractured audience. See how the league itself has subtly shifted its promotional strategies, ensuring that the story of the WNBA is one of a collective of legendary superstars, not a solo act. The conversation has been permanently elevated, and the bar has been raised. Young girls watching today are not just learning how to perfect a crossover dribble or a step-back three. They are witnessing masterclasses in how to use their voice with conviction, how to handle immense pressure with poise, and how to navigate a world that will constantly try to put them in a box and define them by simplistic narratives. This was a defining moment, a painful but necessary birthing pang for the next era of women's sports. It was a moment the sport was forced to grow up, to graduate from being just a game to being a full-fledged cultural force, with all the scrutiny, responsibility, and immense power that comes with it. Let's be clear, the journey is far from over. The work towards true equity and fair representation is a continuous process, a marathon, not a single destination reached with one viral moment. But a critical line was crossed, and there is no going back. The silence has been shattered, and the demand for a seat at the table for everyone, players, coaches, and fans of all backgrounds, has been etched into the walls. So, we turn this over to you. We spent this time diving deep into all the layers, the context, the fallout, and the lasting impact. But now, the most important voice is yours. This is a conversation, not a lecture. Where you stand after hearing all of this? Was Juju Watkins ultimately right to speak up and voice that uncomfortable, systemic truth, even with the full knowledge that it could be, and was ripped from its context and used as a weapon against her? Or do you believe it was a misstep? That in the crucial moment of the sport's growth, some truths are better left unsaid to present a unified, conflict-free frontal world? Do you believe the sports media has a fundamental responsibility to share the spotlight more equitably, to actively seek out and promote the dozens of other incredible stories in the league? And perhaps the most difficult question of all, how can the league, the networks, and the fans themselves better balance the undeniable duty to celebrate a once-in-a-generation talent like Caitlin Clark, while also ensuring the entire beautiful garden of talent in the WNBA gets the sunlight and water it needs to collectively bloom? The conversation doesn't end when this video fades to black. It continues with you in the comments below. We read every single one, and this is a discussion we are truly passionate about. So, let us know your honest thoughts. And if you found this deep dive into one of the most pivotal moments in modern sports enlightening, make sure you do us a huge favor and subscribe and hit that notification bell. Because the stories of Juju, Caitlin, and the entire WNBA are still being written. The next chapter is just around the corner, and you will not want to miss what happens next.